Chapter 214. Among all the assassins in Sai City, Sunset Shadow was a relatively unknown figure. He had joined Sai City for the shortest time and spent the least time in Mount Taibai. He was low-key, gentle, and taciturn. The only thing that impressed people was his strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. As his partner, Deep Dream often felt that she didn't know Sunset Shadow. This top assassin, who had been trusted deeply since he joined Sai City 5 years ago, spent most of his time doing his own thing in silence, killing, observing, and learning. He didn't look cold-blooded and liked to laugh, but he rarely spoke. Deep Dream never denied the tacit understanding between her and him, but this tacit understanding often came from Sunset Shadow's own cooperation. Deep Dream didn't know what he was thinking, what he wanted, and what he wanted to pursue. In their many communications, Sunset Shadow never talked about this. In the beginning, Deep Dream always felt that Sunset Shadow's character was most in line with Sai City's concept of standing aloof from the world. But as they worked together for a long time, she could clearly feel the silent obsession in her partner's heart. As for what this obsession was, Deep Dream still didn't know until today. In terms of strength, Deep Dream was confident that she could beat Sunset Shadow by a little bit, but she knew very well that in terms of status in Sai City, she was one level lower than Sunset Shadow. Before Li Tianlan appeared, Tribulation was the deputy governor of Sai City. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were known as the twin pillars of Sai City. If nothing changed, after Situt Sangyue, the position of governor would definitely fall on Tribulation. But the candidate for deputy governor was not Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, but Sunset Shadow. He was the only candidate. This alone was enough to show his importance in the hearts of Situt Sangyue and Tribulation. Even if Li Tianlan became the young governor of Sai City now, after some changes that Sai City didn't want to see, Sunset Shadow would still become one of the most important figures in Sai City. Therefore, when Situt Sangyue imparted the myriad Daoist collection to the two of them, she also taught Sunset Shadow the other half of a unique skill. This seal was called immortality. But even Situt Sangyue couldn't figure out the artistic conception and force exertion method in this half move, so for many years, she had only mastered this half move. This half style symbolized power, status, and responsibility. Deep Dream didn't know how terrifying this half move of immortality was. But for many years, Situt Sangyue, who had been in the invincible realm and even entered the divine list, couldn't figure out the half move. It itself had a kind of power that no one dared to underestimate. This move was definitely not weaker than their combined move, Myriad Daoist Collect. In fact, it might even be stronger. The Myriad Dao all-encompassing net required the two of them to work together, but Sunset Shadow was activating half of the Undying Seal alone. What would the result be? Above the ninth heaven, wind and thunder surged. Violent winds and lightning filled the entire battlefield. Wind Ghost had already gone all out. Li Tianlan's figure could not land in the gale. Wind Ghost's sword and the lightning met in the air. Every time he chopped, a large piece of lightning penetrated the gale. Thunder rolled high in the sky, and the thunder was like rain or waterfall. In an instant, Li Tianlan's figure was drowned in it, like a divine punishment. Flesh and blood splattered in the air. Li Tianlan had no choice but to resist in silence. But Sunset Shadow, who was not far away, looked more and more determined. The half of the Undying Seal had been completed. The figure of the Big Dipper seemed to be suspended in the vacuum, floating uncontrollably, struggling in vain. But the body of Wind Ghost was still in the air in his sight. Thousands of sword lights poured down wildly, bringing a lot of blood. A trace of regret flashed through Sunset Shadow's eyes. His emotions seemed to be a little complicated in a trance. The world-shaking unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School, was known as the fiercest and most violent unique skill of sword intent in the Dark World. The last leader of Jifeng Sword Raining School had a decisive battle with an invincible realm expert many years ago, and this move had blossomed with unparalleled light. That decisive battle took place about 20 years ago. It was one of the shortest decisive battles of the invincible realm in recent decades. At that time, the leader of Jifeng Sword Raining School only used 2 moves. The first move was the most basic fierce wind cut. After the fierce wind cut, the invincible realm expert was directly swept into the sky by the wind, and then he was greeted by Jifeng Sword Raining School. From beginning to end, in less than a minute, the sword intent poured down wildly, layer upon layer, like a surging river. The invincible realm expert lost his balance and was chopped to death in the air without even fighting back. And that battle did not help the Grandmaster of Jifeng Sword Raining School, but the reputation of this world-shaking unique skill. Of course, the unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School was not invincible. The most important thing was to avoid the wind brought by the fierce wind cut. All the unique skills of Jifeng Sword Raining School needed the help of wind to exert their greatest power. How could they control the sword when there was no wind? But now the Big Dipper launched a sneak attack regardless of his identity. Li Tianlan was directly swept into the air by the wind, and Wind Ghost controlled the sword in person. In such a situation, any expert under the half-step invincible realm could only fight with brute force. This was a young heavenly son who had been invested too much hope and obsession by Sai City. How could Sunset Shadow let him fight with brute force? How could he bear to let him fight with brute force? A touch of blue suddenly flashed in Sunset Shadow's resolute and clear eyes, and the half-style of the undying seal in his hands suddenly shook. Heaven and earth fell silent in an instant. With Sunset Shadow as the center, a circle of air waves visible to the naked eye suddenly rose in the forest. The air waves spread rapidly and suddenly filled the forest for hundreds of meters. The wind stopped. The lightning disappeared. Not far away, the flames were extinguished, and the sword light stopped. Deep Dream's scream stopped abruptly. She opened her mouth, but she could not make any sound. The world was silent. At this moment, the area with a radius of hundreds of meters suddenly became the purest vacuum. She could not attack, move, or breathe. All her movements were completely frozen, and then she floated up. Invincible Realm. It was not a pseudo-domain, but a real domain of the invincible realm. Whether it was the Big Dipper or Wind Ghost, there was only fear in their eyes. The unique skill of Jifeng Sword Raining School was completely shattered by the vacuum. The moment the Big Dipper lost control of his body, Sunset Shadow shot out from his domain. All the bones in his body were shattering amidst the violent vibrations, turning into dust and powder. But his eyes were still calm. In an almost eternal moment, he looked at Li Tianlan. There was relief, emotion, and sigh in his eyes. His name was Sunset Shadow, but none of the people present knew him. His surname was also Li. They didn't need to know. Li Tianji. In the last afterglow of his life, Sunset Shadow murmured his name and rushed directly to the Big Dipper, whose eyes were filled with horror. The vacuum shook wildly. The center of the collision between the two shone with brilliant and dazzling lightning. Wherever the light passed, everything turned into dust. The bodies of the Big Dipper and Sunset Shadow disappeared completely, leaving only a large amount of dust floating in the air. Shadow. Deep Dream's shrill scream finally rang out. The word sunset was cut off before the void was formed, so the last word sounded extremely shrill. The vacuum dissipated. Li Tianlan, who suddenly fell, ignored the blood all over his body and instantly leaped over Wind Ghost. Wind Ghost, who moved almost at the same time as him, suddenly raised his head. The sword edge whistled. Fierce wind cut. A violent gust of wind blew toward Li Tianlan along with the raised sword edge. Li Tianlan had been prepared. His figure flashed and directly switched places with the shadow. The bright and dazzling light bloomed directly on the edge of the human emperor sword in his hands, and the killing intent was overwhelming. Wind Ghost turned around abruptly. In his sight, Li Tianlan's figure had disappeared. There was only sword shadow in the whole world. Infinite light danced fiercely, accompanied by sparks that were compressed to the extreme. A 100-meter-long giant sword took shape directly in the light. The sword edge vibrated, and the giant sword, like a phantom, crossed the distance of dozens of meters and instantly appeared in front of Wind Ghost. The sword edge could break everything. Wind Ghost had no time to react at all, and the sword edge, which was several meters high, directly hit his chest. The giant sword moved forward, carrying Wind Ghost's body directly across the sky hundreds of meters high. The infinite sword intent completely tore his body apart, and sparks burst out, directly burning his body into ashes. This was not a unique technique belonging to the Li family. An extreme outbreak. This was the unique technique of the Wang family of Beihai. Sword of Emperor Path. Li Tianlan had landed. His expression was still calm, and his aura was weak, but his eyes were unprecedentedly bright. The sharpness that he had restrained to the extreme burst out of his body without reservation. At this moment, Li Tianlan's every move was with a kind of blazing, almost dazzling style, almost perfect. The giant sword leaped and disappeared in the air. In the deep pit that was blasted out by the sword, an incredible scream suddenly rang out. Dongxing Rushi's figure rushed out of the sky again. Heavenly Fairy. An expert of the thunder-shocking realm of Jifeng Sword Raining School staggered out of the deep pit, and fell to the ground after just 2 steps. In his chest, a scarlet crystal-clear dagger was slightly trembling, and the hilt, which was carved with countless complicated golden patterns, was full of blood. Lovesickness was stained with blood. At the same time, under the night sky, at Changdao International Airport, a beautiful woman in white whose age could not be guessed walked out of the airport hall with some cold people. She wore a long white dress, a green bracelet, a long sword on her back, and a dagger on her waist. The simple dress was obvious at a glance, but there was a sense of unreal beauty and illusion. The woman walked quietly, with empty and numb eyes, like a lifeless walking corpse. The airport was heavily guarded. Countless soldiers and elites of the special warfare system were patrolling and searching in the airport. Once they found anything suspicious, they would intercept it immediately. The woman in white walked past a pair of special policemen as if there was no one else around. The faint fragrance wafted in the air. The special policemen sniffed subconsciously and looked around blankly, but they saw nothing. A number of luxury buses were parked in front of the airport hall, and on the screen on the wall was a map of the whole territory of East Island. The woman stood in front of the door and looked up. In her sight, every city on the map of East Island appeared in front of her. She stood quietly, and her eyes wandered. Quietly, she stopped in the Ninghu area. The woman's empty and numb eyes suddenly had a little more fluctuation, like a dream, with a kind of mistiness that could make all living things fall. Time passed slowly. The gloomy night was still the same. After a long time, the woman moved. She took a deep look at the Ninghu area and turned around silently. Her snow-white hand subconsciously grasped the dagger hanging on her waist. It was a scarlet dagger that was almost crystal clear. It was gorgeous and exquisite, with fine and elegant golden patterns spreading over the dagger. It looked complicated and mysterious. The woman grasped the dagger tightly. Her originally weak body seemed to have gained a little more strength, and her walking pace also became slightly faster. While walking, she took off the dagger, put it in front of her eyes, and pulled it out of the scabbard. The fine golden patterns on the scarlet and transparent blade were more complicated and elegant. Near the hilt, 2 deep traditional Chinese characters were still as clear as yesterday, even after so many years. Forgetting each other. Yearning and forgetting each other, the woman's eyes were blurred and dazed, and eventually became completely empty and numb. She put away the dagger and walked straight ahead, without looking back. She couldn't look back, because she had no choice. This was Changdao. From the moment she set foot on this land, or perhaps even before, she already knew that in this life, she would have to apologize to a second person for the second time. The sky was quiet, and the sky was full of stars. The night was long. In the darkest time of the night, the dawn was approaching. There was night. Chapter 2:15. Even nonentities had their own pursuits. There was no absolute detachment from worldly affairs in this world. Times were changing, things were changing, the general trend was rising and falling, and the storm was turbulent. In the secular world, as long as one was alive, there would be more or less right and wrong and cause and effect. The biggest difference was nothing more than the distance from right and wrong. The Lin clan in Switzerland, a family that was extremely strange to most experts, was undoubtedly the farthest family from right and wrong in the dark world. For hundreds of years, this family, which clearly had the power to turn the world upside down in the general trend, was willing to keep a low profile, and had been living in an ordinary city in Switzerland, far away from right and wrong, quietly watching the ups and downs of the dark world. They had always existed, but almost never existed. This was a life that most people could not understand. It was a life full of absolute freedom, carefree, neither advancing nor retreating. When a family had money that could not be spent for hundreds or thousands of years, and they did not care about power and status, what else could they do in their daily lives? Apart from eating, drinking, and playing, it seemed that there was only eating, drinking, and playing. The Lin clan was a very strange family. It was very large and also very small. Hundreds of years of inheritance had given birth to one branch after another in this family, and these branches decreased one by one with the passage of time. But this was not because they were destroyed by others, but because the Lin clan was constantly divided within itself. For hundreds of years, even the patriarch of the Lin clan did not know how much money he had. This kind of life of squandering and doing nothing at will was not liked by everyone. Over time, in this kind of overly comfortable environment, some incredible things would naturally happen. Some people in the Lin clan loved to travel. In the last generation, there was a couple from a side branch who left the Lin clan to travel with their 6-year-old child. Then the travel became a trip, and they left for decades. It was not until 3 years ago that they returned to Switzerland. Some people in the Lin clan loved to collect, so they built a collection museum with their own money. Decades later, the collection museum had become a magical place that was comparable to any large museum in the world. Some people in the Lin clan liked to do business. Some people in the Lin clan liked to fight for hegemony. This was a family that had never had any differences. The so-called side branches and direct descendants were completely equal in the Lin clan. It was no exaggeration to say that everyone in this family could do whatever they wanted when they were really bored. Money? Yes. They could get as much as they wanted and give them whenever they wanted. The wealth that everyone liked really became waste paper that could be wasted at will here. These waste papers contained the ambitions and hobbies of generations of the Lin clan, which made the Lin clan constantly divided. It was division. The Lin clan never entered the secular world, but they did not oppose entering it either. Generation after generation of the Lin clan continued to develop, and the restless guys in each generation would get enough money and shelter to leave the Lin clan to expand in the outside world. The people of the Lin clan were all over the world, forming one Lin family after another. Today, the Lin family, which had split off hundreds of years ago, had already cut off all ties with the Lin clan in Switzerland. It could even be said that they were two different forces. Only some of the branches that had split off in the past 100 years understood that they came from the same place. They supported each other and continued to grow. At the same time, they maintained almost no connection with the Lin clan. A few people noticed this. So in their eyes, the Lin clan, or the Lin clan alliance, which developed in the outside world, was the Lin clan. But only a few people knew that these were just the branches that had split off from the Lin clan, and the real Lin clan had always been in Switzerland, in the Worry-Free Villa at the foot of Worry-Free Mountain in Switzerland. Worry-Free Mountain was located in the northeast of Geneva, with a radius of 50 miles. It was the property of the Lin clan. Worry-Free Villa was said to be a villa, but in fact, it was comparable to an exquisite and prosperous small city. The scenery was pleasant, magnificent, and charming. It could be said to be a real worry-free place. As a member of the Lin clan, as long as he didn't want to think too much, everyone could indeed be carefree for the rest of his life. But as the patriarch of the Lin clan, as the real core figure of the Lin clan, could he really be carefree in his long life? At 9:00 in the morning, the quiet and tranquil Wolfrey Heights gradually regained its vitality. When the bored and free people of the Lin clan began to enjoy a new day, a helicopter slowly rose into the sky with the whistling sound of the rotors, bathed in the sunshine of the new day and quickly went away. Lin Fengting, who had returned from Jianghu state with his daughter for only a few months, sat in the specially modified cabin and silently looked at the scenery outside the window. His expression was soft, but there was a touch of contemplation in his eyes. Is the news accurate? Very abruptly, he opened his mouth and asked. His voice was steady and casual, but there was an obvious seriousness and even solemnity in his words. It's accurate. Sitting opposite Lin Fengting was a young man in his 20s. He was slender, and his face was 70% similar to Lin Fengting's. They were both handsome and tough. He wore a white casual suit and sat quietly opposite Lin Fengting. He was soft and warm, without any aggression. He looked at Lin Fengting with undisguised intimacy in his eyes. Dad, I've seen it myself. There is indeed a sword mark that I feel is very familiar at the scene, and there are also traces left by a murderous weapon. It's just that the area is too desolate. For the time being, we can't determine the time when the battle took place, but it was at least 3 years ago. Lin Fengting nodded. The light in his eyes was deep and calm. Is it the Shadow the Ripper? The Shadow the Ripper. It was one of the 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World. It was also the only murderous weapon whose specific trace could not be determined in the Dark World in recent years. 30 years ago, the Shadow the Ripper once belonged to India, a superpower of Han state. At that time, the ruler of India, Long Xiang, an expert of the invincible realm, had the heavenly king heart and the exquisite bone. He was known as the first expert of Han state, holding the Shadow the Ripper, and had the ambition to conquer all of Asia. However, India invaded Jianghu state at its most glorious time. At that time, Li Honghe, the god of war of Jianghu state, took action in person, and the 24 moves of Sword of the Li family roared on the border. The battle lasted a day and a night, from Jianghu state directly to Han state. Li Honghe entered Han state alone, chased for more than 400 miles, and finally killed Long Xiang, the first expert of Han state. The murderous weapon, the Shadow the Ripper, disappeared from that day until today. Lin Fengting and the Lin clan themselves did not have much interest in the Shadow the Ripper. However, 19 years ago, with the destruction of the Li family, Li Guangtu's treason, and the destruction of the Li family's murderous weapon, the Infinite Sky, a trace of obsession gradually appeared in the Lin clan. Since Lin Fengting took charge of the Lin clan, he had been investigating clues about the Shadow the Ripper. The conflict with the Vatican a few years ago was mostly because of this reason. However, there were too many rumors about this murderous weapon, true and false. Lin Fengting searched many times but found nothing. However, in his heart, this had become an obsession, so he had never given up for many years. It was not until yesterday that the Lin clan's branches in the outside world finally locked a trace of the Shadow the Ripper again. Lin Yuxian, Lin Fengting's eldest son, rushed to the scene to investigate in person. As a result, he accidentally found another sword mark that felt very familiar to him. Lin Yuxian rushed back to Carefree Heights overnight and told Lin Fengting about it. Then, without any delay, the father and son took a helicopter to the border between Switzerland and Germany again. Most murderous weapons have owners. Every time they move, there will be intelligence from all sides, but there is no news at the border this time. It should not belong to any murderous weapon that has an owner now, so it is very likely to be the Shadow the Ripper. Father, you have to see it in person to be sure. Lin Yuxian shook his head, hesitated, and told the truth. Lin Fengting nodded, looked at his eldest son whose eyes were red, and said softly, "You've worked hard. Are you tired these 2 days?" "I'm fine." Lin Yuxian shook his head and said, "Dad, don't scold me for being a good-for-nothing. I really feel good now. When you came back from Jianghu state, it was the easiest time for me." Lin Fengting was silent for a while, but he still couldn't help laughing and scolding, "You are really good for nothing." Lin Yuxian smiled, but his eyes were a little dazed. He said softly, "If I have time, I really want to see Tianlan." He replaced my position, wrong. Lin Fengting waved his hand and said faintly, "That is his position. If you go, you will be the real replacement. Your position is the patriarch of the Lin clan. You can't forget this. Yes. Lin Yoxian's expression changed, and he agreed seriously. Yuxian, you must remember. The whole Lin clan could forget about their worries, but as the patriarch, he could forget everything except for his worries. It is naturally hard for Tianlan to revive the Li family, but you will be carrying the whole Lin clan in the future. Isn't it hard? Lin Fengting's eyes were calm and vicissitudes of life. He said softly, the word patriarch itself is hard. Chapter 2:16. What Lin Fengting said was an irrefutable fact, so Lin Yuxian had nothing to say. His parents named him Yuxian, but they did not want him to be carefree all his life. The greater the power, the higher the status, and the stronger the strength, the greater the responsibility. This was a universal truth, and it was also applicable within the Lin clan. The headquarters of the Lin clan stood aloof from worldly affairs and were carefree, but none of the collateral branches that split from the headquarters was bad. Although the major branches had little contact with the headquarters, there was cause and effect between them after all. They were of the same origin. If something really happened, the Lin clan could not just stand by and watch. How to ensure the prosperity of the collateral branches when the headquarters did not care about worldly affairs was a problem that tested every generation of the patriarch of the Lin clan for hundreds of years. It tested the wisdom of dealing with the world and also tested the world's shaking strength. As a patriarch, how could he forget his worries? Power was the greatest right and wrong. My sister, Lin Yuxian, looked at Lin Fengting and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. This was indeed a young man who did not seem to be aggressive at all. Even when he talked about some sensitive things, he was still calm and gentle like a piece of clear water without ripples. She is a girl. If it is not a last resort, who is willing to stand in front of the stage? It is best to live a peaceful and steady life. Lin Fengting was silent for a while and shook his head. He seemed to think of something and suddenly said with a smile, if things don't change, I was going to find a wife for you. She is 2 years younger than you. After a few years, she will also be an outstanding beauty. She may not be worse than the one in Samsara Palace. If you go back to Jianghu State, maybe it will be a good story. It's a pity that Li Tianlan got it first. Lin Yuxian did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said helplessly, are you talking about Wang Yuetong? Last time before you went to Jianghu State, you seemed to show me her photo. It is really a pity. Are you very envious? Do you regret it? Lin Fengting's eyes were soft. He leaned on the sofa with a relaxed body and looked at his son with a smile. I regret it so much that my intestines are blue. Lin Yuxian patted his thigh and laughed. Although he was talking about regret and pity, the eyes of the young master of the Lin clan were full of sincerity. His smile slowly faded. He looked at his father sitting in front of him, hesitated for a moment, and then said softly, but Tianlan is not me. Even if Wang Yuetong appears by his side, can she really affect the overall situation? In other words, can Wang Yuetong really stay with Tianlan in the end? What are you trying to say? Lin Fengting's tone was calm. I mean, can we intervene a little? Maybe Uncle Wang. Lin Yoxian's tone was cautious and vague. I can't. Lin Fengting shook his head without hesitation. The Lin clan doesn't care about worldly affairs. This matter involves too much. How can we interfere? Let Tianlan join the Lin clan? Let's not talk about whether we're willing or not, even he himself would probably reject it. Lin Yuxian was silent and lost in thought. We owe the Li family a sword. If we can find clues about the Shadow the Ripper this time, I will give the Shadow the Ripper and divine punishment to Tianlan to settle the karma. The rest is up to him. Lin Fengting's tone was calm and firm. Lin Yuxian took a deep look at his father and nodded, but he thought of many years ago. In the year when the Li family was destroyed, he was still an ignorant child and could not remember his father's attitude when he learned the news. But it seemed that from that year on, the Lin clan began to secretly pursue the news of the Shadow the Ripper. How important were the 12 murderous weapons in the dark world? It was the power of the invincible realm. When it was fired with all its strength, it was equivalent to a full blow from an invincible realm expert. Such a murderous weapon could be said to be a treasure related to the fate of the country and one of the greatest deterrents in the dark world. The 11 murderous weapons had a clear owner. The Lin clan did not want to enter the secular world to participate in disputes, so they could only track down the whereabouts of the missing Shadow the Ripper. When Lin Yuxian was 13 years old, he began to get involved in the secret affairs of the Lin clan bit by bit. It was also that year that in the chat between father and son, Lin Fengting said intentionally or unintentionally, "In any case, the foundation and glory left by our ancestors can't disappear in vain." At that time, Lin Yuxian was still young, but he also vaguely sensed something through this sentence. Lin Yuxian officially stepped into the fire-flaming realm at the age of 18. That year, the Lin clan accidentally got the news about the Shadow the Ripper. Several branches took action in person, but in the end, it was proved that the news was not true. The Lin clan did not get the murderous weapon. But that year, Lin Fengting made formal arrangements for Lin Yuxian and his sister Lin Chuxue. The foundation and glory of our ancestors could not disappear in vain. Since the Li family was destroyed, Lin Yuxian should split from the Lin clan, return to Jianghu state, and rebuild Zhuanyuantai. And Lin Chuxue would be responsible for the affairs of the Lin clan in the future. A few years passed, and there was no news from the Shadow the Ripper. Lin Yuxian, who was nearly 24 years old, officially stepped into the thunder-shocking realm a few months ago. He did not have the wind and thunder veins, the heavenly king heart, or the exquisite bone, but his real combat capability was no less than any young heavenly son. A few months ago, Lin Fengting revisited Jianghu state with his daughter. It seemed to be a trip, but he suddenly contacted Wang Tianzong after not contacting the Wang family of Beihai for more than a decade. At that time, he really wanted to matchmake Lin Yuxian and Wang Yuetong. The Lin clan and the Wang family of Beihai had been friends for generations. The ancestors of the Lin clan founded Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun, which was strongly supported by the ancestors of the Wang family of Beihai. Later, the Lin clan left Jianghu state and passed the supreme power of Zhuanyuantai to their disciple, the Li family. For hundreds of years, the Li family had been the closest comrade of the Wang family of Beihai. Although the Li family was destroyed, the friendship between the Lin clan and the Wang family of Beihai still existed. Moreover, if the Lin clan counted the branches, even the Wang family of Beihai had to pay attention to its strength. With Lin Fengting, once Lin Yuxian returned to Jianghu state to rebuild Zhuanyuantai, at least the Wang family of Beihai would not object. If Lin Yuxian and Wang Yuetong were to marry, Wang Tianzong would even give some support. Lin Fengting went to Jianghu state before to test Wang Tianzong's attitude. This was also Lin Fengting's pursuit and obsession for many years. The glory of Zhuanyuantai of Jianghu state and the god of war family belonged to the Li family as well as the Lin clan. If the Li family was destroyed, the Lin clan would certainly not stand idly by. Lin Fengting would rather let his own son split from the headquarters to make Zhuanyuantai reappear in Jianghu state, which was enough to show his determination. However, before he talked about this topic with Wang Tianzong, Li Tianlan and the Samsara Palace appeared. The Li family had a successor. Under such circumstances, Lin Fengting naturally did not want his son to continue to be involved in the muddy water of Jianghu state, so he directly withdrew. He did not even mention the matter of Lin Yuxian. Presumably, Wang Tianzong was still confused about what he wanted to do in Jianghu state. Lin Fengting suddenly smiled and said slowly, "The Li family and the Lin clan are of the same origin. In the future, when you all settle down, you might as well make friends with Tianlan." Lin Yuxian replied with a The appearance of Li Tianlan directly replaced his position in the future. Without him, it might be him who was fighting in East Island now. Lin Yuxian knew this very well. Moreover, the Li family had a successor, which could make the Lin clan more comfortable in adjusting the power inheritance in the clan. It was not that Lin Chuxue was not good enough, but in contrast, Lin Yuxian was more suitable for this position. However, Lin Yuxian and Li Tianlan were different after all. If he went to Jianghu state, it was almost certain that he would marry Wang Yuetong and rebuild Zhuanyuantai. At least, he would not encounter resistance from the Wang family of Beihai. Whether the new Zhuanyuantai would join the Southeast group again or not, Wang Tianzong would not be a villain. Because the Lin clan was not surnamed Li after all. Not to mention how powerful the Lin clan was, even the old subordinates of Old Master Li Honghe who were still in the Southeast group would not necessarily agree with the new Zhuanyuantai of the Lin clan. But if it was Li Tianlan, it was completely different. Could he and Wang Yuetong be together? Even if they were forced to be together, it would not affect the overall situation. Tianlan's future situation is not very good, is it? Lin Yuxian said hesitantly. Not too bad. After all, there is Samsara Palace. That Qin Weibai of Samsara Palace is really a smart person. I can't be sure now, but in this final battle of Chengdao, there must be something fishy inside. Samsara and Zhongzhou state may not advance or retreat together. It's really uncertain who will be the winner after this final battle. But this is also good. I think they also understand that if they want to protect Li Tianlan, it may not be a good thing to keep too close to Zhongzhou state. A Samsara palace with an ambiguous position outside Zhongzhou state can fight for more space for Li Tianlan. In front of his son, Lin Fengting was extremely talkative. After all, there were few things in this world that could be learned by oneself. The so-called wisdom could also be inherited. Being influenced by what one saw and heard over the years was the most direct way of inheritance. Lin Yuxian seemed to be thinking and almost said to himself, "Who is the master of Samsara Palace?" Lin Fengting's face suddenly became dignified. The master of Samsara Palace was an extremely powerful figure. This year, she was even more outstanding. She destroyed Night Spirit, killed Tian Xian, took the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld, defeated Gu Xingyun, and set off the final battle of Chengdao. Everything that happened in the Dark World this year had a great relationship with her. No one could take such a figure lightly. This is also the question I want to know. Lin Fengting said softly, with her strength, "I'm afraid she may not be worse than my second brother. This person is definitely related to the Li family, but it seems that she is also related to Kunlun City. The 24 moves of sword and the 10th unique domain are actually concentrated on her. It's incredible. She's really a mystery." Recently, the Lin clan has also been looking for the news of the master of Samsara Palace, but they have found nothing. This person is too low-key, as if she doesn't exist. There is no trace of her. Lin Yuxian gave a wry smile, spread his hands, and joked, If Qin Weibai is 10 years older, I even think she is the master of Samsara Palace." Lin Fengting dismissed it with a smile. This assumption was not even speculation, and there was no factual basis at all. Not to mention that Qin Weibai didn't know martial arts. Even if she really hid her strength, it was impossible for her to master the power of the invincible realm at the age of more than 20. The Lin clan had a long history, and they did know some extreme methods that could make people barely reach the thunder-shocking realm in their early 20s. But the power of the invincible realm was several times stronger than that of the thunder-shocking realm. It was impossible to reach the invincible realm at the age of 20, not to mention in reality, even in theory. This person may be one of the hidden pawns left by Senior Li, or even my second brother's sister. Anyway, we should pay more attention. And we can see the specific clues soon. Lin Fengting said lightly. Lin Yuxian was stunned, and then he realized and said, "That sword mark?" Lin Fengting nodded. The sword mark that makes you feel familiar but can't tell the reason can only be left by a superior of the invincible realm, and it is likely to be the unique skill of Zhuanyuantai. It is very likely that the person who forced the Shadow the Ripper to fire at the border a few years ago was the master of Samsara Palace. I just don't know which sword move she used at that time. His eyes were a little blank, and he thought of the moment when the master of Samsara Palace and Wang Tianzong were about to fight for life and death. On Mount Dibbing, Lin Fengting could be sure that the sword move of the master of Samsara Palace was the 15th blade Samsara. But to this day, he was still not sure which superior of Zhuanyuantai's sword intent she reincarnated. The helicopter began to land in the roar. Below was a mountain range. Half of the mountain range belonged to Switzerland, and the other half belonged to Germany. This was the borderland. In the sound of the rotor turning, Lin Fengting and Lin Yuxian walked out of the cabin. Lin Yuxian led the way in person. They advanced 800 meters. Before Lin Yuxian could speak, Lin Fengting's footsteps had stopped. The hard and solid ground under his feet suddenly became soft and scattered in front of him, and a huge trace of thousands of meters long appeared abruptly. The trace spread from the ground, smashed the rocks, rushed up the hillside, and directly imprinted on a mountain in front with an unstoppable momentum. Everything along the way seemed to be torn into powder. That battle seemed to be a long time ago, but even now, the trace was still clear, and the torn land and rocks still had no sparks. Lin Fengting looked solemn and moved forward along the trace. The soft ground was slightly deformed under his feet, but it returned to its original state the moment he lifted his foot. In the blink of an eye, they were 1,000 meters away. Lin Fengting's figure approached the mountain at the end of the trace. Looking up, the continuous trace went all the way up the mountain. The trace, which was tens of meters wide, became narrower as it went up, which was a sign that the power was condensing and condensing along the way. At the end of the trace, there was a gully deeply engraved into the mountain. The gully was tens of meters long. In terms of length, it was far from the trace left by the murderous weapon, but it had a kind of power that almost smashed the whole mountain into powder. Sword trace. Lin Fengting's pupils suddenly contracted. His body suddenly rose, and the next second, he came directly in front of the sword trace. The sword trace was quietly engraved on the mountain. The original sword intent and sword energy rushed into the mountain, leaving a narrow but deep gap. Every tiny cut in the sword trace and every engraving mark became clearer and clearer in Lin Fengting's eyes, but his eyes gradually became dazed. Absolute sword, Lin Fengting muttered to himself. At this moment, he even completely ignored the trace left by the murderous weapon. Absolute sword? Which sword? Lin Yuxian's expression changed dramatically. Absolute sword was a specific name in Zhuanyuantai's martial arts. It referred to the most powerful sword moves in Zhuanyuantai's martial arts. The core of martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was outbreak. And the core of martial arts of Zhuanyuantai was broken. In the 24 moves of sword, all the sword moves with the word broken could be called absolute sword. However, most of those sword moves belonged to the domain of the invincible manual. Lin Fengting's eyes became more dazed. With hesitation. In any case, he did not expect that the sword trace he saw here would be like this. This sword trace was indeed the absolute sword. But it was not any of the known absolute swords. In this sword trace, Lin Fengting saw something familiar and strange. This was the half of the absolute sword. It was also the last move of the 24 moves of sword. 24 moves break of reincarnation. It was a move of the absolute sword created by the ancestors to restrain the 6 paths of reincarnation of the Wang family of Beihai. However, this half of the absolute sword seemed to have been completely completed and had broken away from the original sword intent. The power of the several absolute swords of Zhuanyuantai was almost the same. Even the break of reincarnation was only aimed at the unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, and its power was not much stronger than the other moves. But the completed sword in front of him was vaguely the sublimation of the 24 moves of sword, and its power was simply unimaginable. This could even be said to be the 25 moves of sword created with the help of the half of the 24 moves of sword. Lin Fengting's eyes were complicated and confused. The half of the 24 moves of sword had always existed in the Lin clan for hundreds of years before. Even the Li family had not mastered it. If this sword move was left by the master of Samsara Palace, who was she? If the master of Samsara Palace had nothing to do with the Li family, but she had mastered the 24 moves of sword, then the most likely possibility was that she was from the Lin clan. Especially the completed half of the absolute sword that even the Li family could not master, it proved something invisibly. Did she have the same idea as him to support Li Tianlan? On the cold mountain peak, Lin Fengting slowly landed on the ground. continue to track down the whereabouts of the murderous weapon. Lin Fengting suddenly said, "Put the matter of the master of Samsara Palace aside for the time being." "Okay." Lin Yuxian responded. Looking at his father who was about to leave, he asked subconsciously, "Dad, where are you going?" "I'm going to Jianghu State." Chapter 217. Changdao, which had been quiet for many days, finally started to be chaotic. The chaos lasted from night to day. After days of depression, the city, which was now a battlefield, finally started to be noisy. An investigation that was thought to be very common. An encirclement and suppression that was thought to be easy. The running and fighting that lasted for a night directly broke the stalemate that had been in Changdao for many days. Jianghu State, East Island, and the other superpowers in Changdao never thought that in the late night of the third day and the early morning of the fourth day, the approaching final battle would directly open the curtains. The sleepless night ushered in the sun, but inside the battlefield of Changdao, a storm was brewing. Teams of elites from Jianghu State left the club one after another. Thousands of people from Jianghu State almost filled the 3 defense zones overnight. Search. East Island reacted almost immediately. The troops that were still on the road sped up their gathering speed, and the elites of the special warfare system also came out from their hiding places in batches. Chase. In the general trend, experts of the invincible realm were like nonentities. But similarly, in the general trend, the 2 opposing sides or even many parties had important figures that they had to protect or kill. For example, Wang Xingxiao of the Wang family of Beihai. For example, Gu Hanshan, the young master of Kunlun City. Another example was Li Tianlan, the young master of Sai City. In the eyes of real experts, they were the future heavenly sons, the future figures of the invincible realm. But from another perspective, the future figures of the invincible realm meant that they were nothing now. After all, they were still too young. They needed killing and experience, and they needed to grow in blood and fire. In the final battle driven by the general trend, they were at most an opportunity, a very important opportunity. The combat capability of the 3 of them was not the top now, but any one of them had the value of changing, or even reversing the general trend. Wang Xingxiao was the future patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, and probably the future number 1 on the divine list. If something happened to him, the Wang family of Beihai would not ignore it. Kunlun City had only risen in Jianghu State for about 20 years. Gu Hanshan, who had the heavenly king heart, was one of the most important figures for them to stabilize their power. He was also enough to change the position of Kunlun City. Li Tianlan was backed by Sai City and Samsara Palace. If Li Tianlan fell into the hands of East Island, these 2 superpowers, at least Samsara Palace, would definitely be threatened by East Island. In this final battle, these 3 people must be protected by Jianghu State, and they must be fought for by East Island. As long as any one of them was captured alive, they could reverse a considerable part of the passive situation. Li Tianlan's appearance made everyone see an important opportunity. No one expected such a figure to appear in an ordinary investigation before the final battle. The moment his trace was confirmed, the news about him was almost immediately passed to Shinichi Miyamoto, the leader of the Divine Wind Force. Then came the encirclement. For the first time, Changdao, which had been peaceful for many days, had fights, conflicts, and chaos. East Island was chasing. Jianghu State was rescuing them. In just one night, the 2 sides had fought more than a dozen times in different areas. But whether they should take advantage of this opportunity and directly fight to the death when the final battle began, neither Jianghu State nor East Island had made up their minds. However, the slaughter had already broken out. How could it be easy for them to live in harmony? He was in a dilemma. For the first time, Shinichi Miyamoto began to feel troubled. If he was given one more day, he would be able to fully prepare everything and then launch the final battle. At that time, on the land of Changdao, he would not be afraid of anyone or any opponent. But just one day later, the opportunity for the final battle suddenly appeared. And this opportunity was Li Tianlan. Right now, Li Tianlan was definitely one of the most crucial figures in this final battle. All the signs showed that this young heavenly son, who appeared in Jianghu state a few months ago, had attracted the interest of several superpowers. Not to mention Sai City and Samsara Palace behind him, even the attitudes of the Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars were unclear. One wanted to kill him directly, and the other wanted to capture him alive. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't know what they were planning, but he was very clear that as long as he could control Li Tianlan, it would definitely be good for East Island's current passive situation. If it was Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan who showed up this time, Shinichi Miyamoto could grit his teeth and suppress his impulse. But Li Tianlan's appearance made him hesitate. It was such a rare opportunity, it would be a pity not to make a move. But if he made a move, he was not well prepared now. Although he only had 1 day, the entire battle of Changdao would last only 7 days. When the final battle started, all the superpowers of the Dark World would get involved. 1 day was enough to bring too many variables. The sun shone on every corner of the mountain, and the hot light shone on the low hillside. The military tents gradually reflected the dazzling light. Shinichi Miyamoto stood in front of his tent, watching the darkness turn into light in his sight. He was motionless, like a statue. This was the temporary headquarters of the final battle in East Island. They didn't station themselves in some places with people. Instead, they chose a low hill with few people and pitched tents one after another on the hill. In this final battle of East Island, 80% of the most powerful elites were here. And Shinichi Miyamoto, the palace master of Liuhua Palace and the leader of the Divine Wind Force, the only superior of the Invincible Realm in East Island, had also been here since the first day. The final battle was approaching, and Shinichi Miyamoto's state of mind was getting calmer and calmer. But Li Tianlan's news disturbed his mind. He had been standing here all night, but the hesitation in his heart was still surging. What do you think? Under the sun, Shinichi Miyamoto, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly opened his mouth. He was dressed in a gray ninja costume, and even his face was covered. He was like a shadow in the daytime, vague and illusory. Li Tianlan must be controlled by us. This is an absolutely good opportunity, and it's fleeting. Your Highness, we can't hesitate. Tian Yu, the High Priest of ISE Grand Shrine, made his position clear immediately. He was seriously injured in the battle against Li Baidian, Dongqing Rushi, and others in the capital city, and he hadn't fully recovered yet. But right now, his tone was firm, even resolute. This person is indeed very important in this battle. It's not only about the internal affairs of Jianghu state, but also about the Samsara Palace. He's a key figure, and we should take the initiative. Heavenly Hound, the left advisor of Wuxia Palace, said in a deep voice. The people present, especially those who could stand in front of Shinichi Miyamoto, were all important figures in the special warfare system of East Island, including the top management of the Divine Wind Force, the giants of the Shinto sect, the left and right advisors of Wuxia Palace, and the key figures of Liuhua Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School. In the upcoming final battle, each of them was the most crucial combat capability. If they had the same attitude toward the final battle, their will would even be stronger than Shinichi Miyamoto's own will. What are you worried about, Your Highness? Tide and Glacier asked at the same time. These two superiors of the half-step invincible realm were the left and right guards of the Mikado, and their status was very high. Their questions seemed to represent their position. I'm worried that this is a bait set by Jianghu state. Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and said in a low voice, it's such a coincidence that Li Tianlan exposed himself this time. It's an opportunity, but it could also be a trap. Glacier and Tide looked at each other and spoke again at the same time. They said flatly, this is East Island. Shinichi Miyamoto smiled bitterly. This was indeed East Island, but now it was the conflict of the Dark World. A large number of elites of East Island were trapped in Huading, Jianghu state. Now their strength was limited, and they couldn't use the troops on the periphery. So what if this was East Island? I support the final battle. A clear voice sounded. This is our country. Since we have such a good opportunity, why don't we fight? We're not ready, and the others aren't either. Anyway, we have the advantage. Shinichi Miyamoto narrowed his eyes, but he remained calm. It was Crown Prince Rend who spoke. Glacier and Tide, the two superiors from the royal family, had already expressed their stance, so there was no need to ask Crown Prince Ren's position. He forced himself to calm down and suddenly said, "Sorry, I need to make a phone call." Under everyone's confused gaze, he walked aside and dialed a number. It wasn't the Mikado or the Prime Minister, but someone outside East Island. "Your Highness Miyamoto?" On the other side of the phone, a lazy voice sounded with a hint of a smile. "What can I do for you?" "Li Tianlan." Shinichi Miyamoto didn't waste any time and said in a deep voice, "He's here." "Evil, why don't you make a move?" On the phone, the only killer of the invincible realm in the dark world fell silent. After a long time, he said flatly, "Believe it or not, I have to say that I've observed Li Tianlan. I'm only a few hundred meters away from him, and he's alone. But I always feel that he's dangerous. At least, I don't have the confidence to kill him now. So I need a chance." "Dangerous?" Shinichi Miyamoto raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Yes, it's dangerous." Evil's tone was solemn, but there was a hint of doubt in it. Shinichi Miyamoto didn't say anything more and hung up the phone without any expression. He stood where he was, and after a long silence, he suddenly turned around and said, "Give the order." The superior of East Island, who was waiting for Shinichi Miyamoto's final decision, suddenly trembled. "Catch Li Tianlan at all costs." Shinichi Miyamoto said word by word, "Even if it's the final battle." He finally agreed with Crown Prince Ren's judgment. 7 days was too short after all. Even if Li Tianlan was the bait and East Island wasn't well prepared, Jianghu State wouldn't be well prepared either. In the final battle now, they still had the advantage. But what Shinichi Miyamoto didn't know was that Jianghu State wasn't well prepared, but Li Tianlan, the bait, wasn't thrown out by Jianghu State. If it weren't for a mysterious man's unexpected disruption, Li Tianlan's investigation wouldn't have been exposed. In the final battle now, all the forces exposed to East Island weren't well prepared. But there was a mysterious force that had been waiting for a long time. In the midst of the known and unknown, all the forces of East Island started to take action. The final battle officially broke out. At the same time, in the cold downtown area of Chengdao, in front of a suite of a hotel, a man in white clothes and pants pried open the door in front of him. The door was pulled open from the inside, and what appeared in front of the man in white was like a mirror. Inside the room, there were two men with similar appearances and similar temperaments, both dressed in snow-white clothes, standing face to face. They were like mirror images of each other. The man inside the door had a fleeting expression, and his eyes were complicated and confused. The man outside the door was silent, and his eyes were complicated and sad. Daybreak. Dawn. Did things go well? After a short silence, Daybreak, who was standing in the room, took the initiative to speak, and his voice was a little hoarse. "Very well." Dawn nodded. "More smoothly than I expected. I just killed a superior of the thunder-shocking realm in front of them, and they were exposed. The Big Dipper led people to chase me in person, huh? Your expression seems a little strange." Daybreak was silent for a while, and then he moved aside to let Dawn in. He said slowly, "What happened?" Dawn's facial muscles twitched. He opened his mouth, but didn't speak for a while. "What the hell happened?" Daybreak raised his eyebrows, and his handsome, almost devilish face suddenly looked a little sharp. Tianji. Tianji is dead." Dawn said in a hoarse voice, "He died with the Big Dipper. I saw it with my own eyes." Daybreak's pupils contracted instantly. He raised his hand and slapped Dawn's face hard. "Why didn't you save him?" Daybreak growled, and there was undisguised pain in his eyes. His devilish face suddenly became ferocious. "If I saved him, I would be exposed. I was sure to defeat the Big Dipper, but I wasn't sure to get out unscathed." Dawn lowered his head and said in a low and dispirited tone, "Brother, His Highness will arrive in Chengdao in 3 hours. Daybreak gritted his teeth. After a long while, he sighed helplessly and murmured, "What does His Highness want to do?" Dawn smiled bitterly and didn't speak. The phone suddenly rang. Daybreak took out his phone, looked at the number, and immediately answered. He said in a low voice, "Your Highness. His Highness has gone to Ninghu. He asked me to tell you to go to Ninghu and meet him after you deal with things in Chengdao." On the phone, a cold female voice with endless killing intent rang out. "Phoenix?" Daybreak shouted in surprise, and then frowned. His Highness went to Ninghu? Why did he go to Ninghu at this time? The young master was killed. On the phone, the woman with the code name Phoenix said coldly, and then hung up. It was a simple sentence, but it sounded like thunder in Daybreak's ears. It was earth-shattering. Chapter 218. A high-powered off-road vehicle rushed from Chengdao to Ninghu at a violent speed. The bright sunshine of Chengdao fell far behind the vehicle. It was raining in Ninghu at this time. It was daytime, but the sky was completely covered by gloomy dark clouds. The raindrops kept hitting the car window, pitter-patter, and there was a hazy mist on the car window. The windshield wipers kept working. The off-road vehicle didn't slow down at all in the rain. It roared into the downtown area of Ninghu and drove to the suburbs of Ninghu. The roar of the off-road vehicle's engine seemed to be abnormal, but the driver didn't care. The vehicle roared past Ninghu's Wuxia mountain and rushed into a nearby fishing village as if it was taking off from the ground. The village was very small, with a population of 200 or 300, and the permanent population was no more than 100. It was quiet at this time. The off-road vehicle stopped in the middle of the village and the door opened. In just a few hours, Daybreak and Dawn, who arrived in Ninghu at the fastest speed, didn't stop. Like two white shadows, they flashed and rushed directly to the north of the village. The narrow alley in the north of the village was almost full of fishermen, men and women, old and young. The more mature ones more or less had a trace of regret or sadness on their faces. The crowd talked in twos and threes. Under the gloomy sky, the small fishing village near the sea looked more depressing. Daybreak and Dawn's hearts sank to the bottom. Although they had received the news in advance, they couldn't help but feel cold when they saw it with their own eyes. The villagers' discussion was buzzing, clear and vague. Their minds were blank, and they walked past the villagers around them in a daze, like walking corpses. Huawu is dead. Yeah, what a pity. I haven't seen him for a few days. It turns out, the murderer went too far. He's so cruel. He's a good kid. The last time I saw him, he wanted me to take him fishing. Yeah, he's a kind kid. He often came to help me with things and tutored my son. What a pity. It's too much. Who killed him? Poor little Kudo. Daybreak and Dawn walked forward in a daze, lost. Come in. A clear, flat, and emotionless voice suddenly rang out beside the two of them. The voice was very soft, but it struck their hearts in an instant. Daybreak and Dawn were shocked. They looked at each other and saw the despair in each other's eyes. They knew that the young master had been killed. Although this was definitely bad news, the two of them still had some hope in their hearts. But now, their hope was completely shattered with a simple word from His Highness. If there really was hope, His Highness wouldn't be here at this moment. This could only mean that there was no turning back. The two pushed through the crowd in front of them and strode into the courtyard. There were very few people in the courtyard. A few men and women dressed like ordinary fishermen but with different temperaments were kneeling in the corner of the courtyard. Their faces were ashen and they were motionless, as if they had lost their souls. A middle-aged man, who looked to be in his 40s or 50s, was standing in the middle of the yard calmly. He had a thin, ordinary body and an unremarkable appearance. He stood there expressionlessly, with his back to Dawn and Daybreak. He was calm but exuded an indescribable sense of oppression and danger. It was an indescribable feeling. The whole yard, the whole fishing village, and even the whole world became illusory around the man. The tall and cold woman standing beside the man, and even daybreak and dawn themselves became meaningless background. Only the seemingly ordinary man existed with the most real feeling. He was motionless, but once he moved, it seemed that the whole world around him would be broken into ashes with his outburst. Behind this dazed and oppressive environment, both daybreak and dawn felt an extreme rage and killing intent. "Your Highness," daybreak and dawn stood behind the man and bowed, trying their best to keep calm. The man said nothing and didn't move, like a statue. Dawn subconsciously looked at the woman standing beside the man. It was a woman in her 30s. She was elegant, delicate, arrogant, and mature. She was a very attractive woman, like a thorny rose, delicate and beautiful, but also very dangerous. However, at this moment, standing next to the man, her elegance dimmed like never before. At this moment, she was like a lifeless sculpture, and only the man beside her was the most real person. Her code name was Phoenix. In their organization, she was a master whose position was no less than daybreak and daybreak's. Phoenix seemed to feel Dawn's gaze, but she didn't dare to move. She just turned the corner of her eyes and signaled them to look forward. Daybreak and Dawn moved to the left and right respectively. They looked past the man in front of them, and their faces suddenly changed. A small piece of white cloth was spread out in front of the man. The white cloth was stained with dried and somewhat black blood. A palm that seemed to be maintaining a hand seal was placed on the white cloth. Other than that, there was only a pile of ashes mixed with gravel, as well as some minced meat and broken bones. This was their young master. Daybreak and Dawn's eyes became extremely cold in an instant. Intense anger and killing intent burst out from them in an instant. Smashing bones and scattering ashes? They thought of this word immediately, but their eyes fell on the palm that was still making a seal. What did he want to express by leaving this palm? Was it a provocation? Daybreak's body slightly trembled uncontrollably. He suddenly reached out his hand, and a middle-aged man who was kneeling in the corner flew over uncontrollably and was caught by Daybreak. "What's going on?" Daybreak's voice was as cold as the chilly wind blowing in the hell. I don't know. The morning before yesterday, young master was killed on his way to school and didn't come back that day. We searched for a long time before we found young master's remains under the cliff of Wuxia Mountain. The man caught by Daybreak was an expert who was infinitely close to the thunder-shocking realm. He was also one of the hidden pawns they left in the village to accompany young master. But at this time, this person's face was completely pale, and there was only despair in his eyes. It was self-evident what young master meant to their organization. He was the son of His Highness, a real genius. Although he didn't have fancy things like wind and thunder veins and heavenly king heart and exquisite bone, his real combat capability was unparalleled. As a 10-year-old thunder-shocking realm expert, as long as he was given time, he would definitely enter the invincible realm as soon as he was 30 years old. He was the real heavenly son, destined to sweep the dark world in the future. But now, such a person, who was regarded as the biggest hope by His Highness and the entire organization, was killed. As guardians, they couldn't absolve themselves from the blame. Who did it? Standing in front of his son's remains, the mysterious Highness finally spoke. His voice was still calm, without any extra emotion. The extreme calmness was in itself a kind of complete madness. There was silence. No one could answer this question. After a long time, Daybreak smiled bitterly and said, "Now we can't even find the suspect. Maybe it's the dark forces that entered Chengdao recently, and Zhongzhou State." The expert who was grabbed by breaking dawn said with a fierce gaze. Daybreak glanced at him coldly and didn't even bother to say a word. Young master had been secretly taught by His Highness since he was a child. After he was left to live in this mountain village, Daybreak, Dawn, Phoenix, and the others would come to give him advice from time to time. No one knew more than them how terrifying young master was. A 17-year-old thunder-shocking realm expert represented not only the terrifying and desperate potential in the future, but also the extremely violent combat capability. Many people thought that Daybreak was the strongest expert in the organization except for His Highness. It might not be wrong, but Daybreak was sure that if he fought desperately, He might be able to seriously injure young master, but he would be the one who would die in the end. Even if he and Dawn joined hands, young master couldn't defeat him and wanted to run away, and they couldn't stop him. In other words, in the entire dark world, no one under the invincible realm could kill young master. Under such circumstances, young master was turned into ashes. Which invincible realm expert did it? Even if Shinichi Miyamoto did it himself, he couldn't kill young master without making a sound. The mysterious highness squatted down slowly. He picked up his son's palm, which was still in the gesture of making a handprint. His eyes were complicated and sad. He put the palm in front of his mouth and kissed it. Then he said blandly, "Investigate. Investigate any expert who entered Ninghu in the past week, including those above the fire-flaming realm. Phoenix, you do this. You don't have to go to Changdao anymore." Phoenix froze, then nodded and said, "Yes." The man stayed silent for a long time, then carefully put away all the ashes, broken bones, and minced flesh on the gravel. His expression was calm, but his fingertips were shaking uncontrollably. Turned into ashes. In the broken bones and minced flesh, he felt heartache, and he also felt the murderer's extreme resentment and hatred towards him and all of them. Who on earth had such a deep hatred towards him? And how could the murderer be so resourceful as to find his son? The man's movements were very slow. He slowly collected all the remains into a jar. He held the jar for a long time before sighing softly and muttering to himself, "I've endured for so many years, but what have I gotten in return?" Daybreak and Dawn's facial muscles twitched at the same time. The death of young master was more than just a simple matter of His Highness sending off his son. The plan of their whole organization for so many years completely failed with this murder. It was hard for people who weren't in the game to understand how cruel this move was. "I'll ask Dawn to send you home." The man stroked the jar in his hand and finally gave the urn to Dawn. He said blandly, "After things in Changdao are over, you will send Huawu home in person." Kudu Huawu. Kudu was a fake, of course. But Huawu was his real name. Dawn took the jar with trembling hands, but he couldn't stop his tears from flowing. He knew what it meant to go home. His real home, of course, wasn't in East Island. But if it wasn't in East Island, where could it be? "Yes." Dawn answered in a hoarse voice, and his voice was as shrill as a ghost's. "Let's change the plan of Changdao." The man closed his eyes and opened them after a long time. His tone had become cold and flat again. Originally. He paused, shook his head in self-mockery, and continued, "Protect Li Tianlan with all your strength, at all costs." "Yes." Daybreak and Dawn said at the same time. The man slowly walked out of the courtyard. There were still a lot of villagers wandering outside the courtyard. Seeing the man come out, and he didn't do anything, all the villagers involuntarily made way for him. The man walked calmly, but his steps were slow and heavy. The whole village seemed to be trembling under his footsteps. "Who do you think it is?" He walked slowly and suddenly asked. "I don't know." Daybreak shook his head. The identity of the young master was a secret even in the organization. Under normal circumstances, no matter how advanced the murderer's intelligence system was, he shouldn't have found this place. But their intelligence collection is obviously immature. Dawn held the jar and said slowly, "Although they found the young master, they didn't find." "Shut up." Before he could finish his words, Daybreak had already interrupted him severely with a stern look in his eyes. The man in front of him didn't say a word, walked through the alley very slowly, and walked out of the village in the rain. Crack, woo-woo, behind him, the shrill sound of thunder suddenly rang out the moment the man stepped out of the village. The loud sound appeared and disappeared in an instant. Above the village, the air within a radius of hundreds of meters suddenly twisted violently. In the twisted air, the clouds above seemed to be torn apart in a trance. The air kept squeezing and shaking, becoming fragmented. The fragmented space kept reflecting light, and the light became colorful in the messy reflection. The man had walked out of the village. As he stepped down, the extremely fragmented and twisted space suddenly shone brightly. There seemed to be a rainbow in the village, going straight into the sky from the entrance of the village. The light was gorgeous and cold. In silence, the whole village was twisted and broken. All the buildings and all the villagers were flattened and dissipated in the incredible power. The rain was falling. The man kept walking. From the beginning to the end, no matter he, dawn, daybreak, or phoenix, none of them looked back. Chapter 219. In less than 24 hours, the whole of Changdao went from being extremely quiet to extremely active, and it directly became a whirlpool that could swallow everything. The general trend was booming. All the superpowers participated in it, either actively or passively. The battlefield of Changdao was stained with blood, and the killing didn't stop. On the huge battlefield with a radius of 100 miles, the elites of the dark superpowers encountered each other intentionally or unintentionally, and then they attacked each other without hesitation. This was a war without a target, or in other words, the target was too big. After all, East Island was small, but it was powerful. At least in Asia, it might not be as powerful as Jianghu State, but it was far more powerful than other countries. It was world-class in many fields, especially in the dark world. The warrior spirit that East Island advocated made it particularly powerful in the dark world. In such a small place, there were 3 superiors of the invincible realm. Counting the 2 superiors of Night Spirit who had died, there were 5 superiors of the invincible realm. This alone showed how powerful the special warfare system of East Island was. And this time, the ultimate goal of all the superpowers was the right to speak of the special warfare system of East Island. This was a power that couldn't be shared. So they had to force East Island to compromise, but they were also mortal enemies with each other. No one was willing to give up the interests of the special warfare system of a country. So from the beginning of the Battle of Changdao, this place was destined to be a bloodbath, and it would become the biggest meat grinder in the dark world in recent years. Any superpower that was qualified to participate in the game couldn't get out unscathed. This was a battle of life and death. But before the final battle, at least for the dark superpowers, they barely had a common enemy. So when the final battle broke out, it was reasonable for the superpowers to split up and join forces in the battle. When the morning sun crossed the sky and the scorching sun was about to fall in the west, in the residential area on the edge of the battlefield of Changdao that was about to be demolished, the leaders of the dark superpowers in East Island gathered together again. It was still the same dilapidated hall. The dirty curtains covered the red setting sun outside the window, and the room was dark. A few ghost-like shadows stood quietly in every corner, as if they had never moved. The LCD screen that occupied an entire wall had been turned on, and one image after another was flashing on the screen. Dazzling light emitted from the screen, illuminating the faces of several people in the room. The person closest to the screen was still the first vice president of the Heroes Club, Ben. He held a small and delicate remote control in his hand and froze the flickering picture on the screen. The image froze for a moment, then continued to play. Although the image was no longer flashing, it was still moving. On the screen, a group of white people dressed in different clothes were fighting fiercely. Both sides of the battle wore different emblems on their chests and sleeves, proving that they belonged to 2 different forces. A live broadcast. Ben's skeleton-like thin figure moved. He whistled, and an old and gloomy voice came from the black robe that wrapped around his body. He laughed grimly and said, "The lads of the Polar Ground Alliance and the Holy Sanctum are too energetic. Oh, another one has fallen. Ha, another one. Wonderful, truly wonderful." Humph. 2 cold snorts sounded at the same time. In the dark environment, not far behind Ben, a figure that was as strong as a giant moved, and the awe-inspiring murderous aura condensed and spread, but it wasn't aimed at Ben, but at another figure in the dark. In the dark, there was a dazzling, almost wholly white figure, with blonde hair and white clothes. Even in the dark, there was a kind of dignity and purity that couldn't be profaned. Holy light, control your bastards. Don't think that you're invincible just because someone is standing up for the holy sanctum. No matter how strong the master behind you is, he can't radiate his power to Changdao. In the dark, the voice of the strong figure that was full of great power was cold and thick, with undisguised murderous intent and threat. "Heh, Holy Light," the vice-commander of the Knights Templars, chuckled and said coldly, "the Holy Sanctum doesn't need other people to stand up for us against the Polar Ground Alliance. King Bear, do you want to fight with me? Sooner or later." King Bear laughed grimly, "Right in Changdao, I'll tear you apart myself." "You two, you're not enemies." Ben suddenly spoke, his voice getting older and hoarser, with an indescribable mystery, "at least not now. We now have two most important targets. The first is East Island, and the second is Jianghu State. Compared with them, each of us is weak. If they don't die, do we need to have internal strife?" I agree with Ben's words. Now it seems that our biggest opponents are East Island and Jianghu State. After we destroy them, it's time for us to fight. King Bear, Holy Light, you need to restrain your subordinates. Crow of Fantasy World said in a gloomy tone. King Bear and Holy Light looked at each other and kept silent in the cold murderous intent. "If you all can calm down, then I can tell you a piece of news." Li Tianlan showed up. Ben stared at the big screen in front of him and said slowly. No one said anything. Li Tianlan showed up. They weren't fools, so they naturally knew it. Wasn't it nonsense to say it now? The power of the Polar Ground Alliance in East Island isn't as strong as the Heroes Club, but we can still get this kind of news. King Bear said impatiently, "Ben, what the hell do you want to say? I know you have your own intelligence channels. But do you know where Li Tianlan showed up last time?" Ben sneered, pointed at the big screen, and said in a complicated tone, "The place where Li Tianlan showed up last time is less than 2,000 meters away from here." The hall suddenly went quiet. This was indeed an unexpected news. The elites of Jianghu State were hiding in a luxury club in the middle of the battlefield, but this was already the edge of the battlefield. The elites of East Island were besieging Li Tianlan. Why didn't Li Tianlan retreat to his own base camp? Why did he come here? Who here wasn't shrewd? Even the rash and impulsive Bear King was a character who had experienced many storms in the past. A simple piece of news, but it made them clearly smell a trace of a conspiracy. Li Tianlan naturally doesn't want to come here, but his retreat has been cut off by the elites of East Island. In other words, now he is farther and farther away from the people of Jianghu State, but closer and closer to us. It's very interesting, isn't it? Ben smiled softly, but his voice was a little cold. Obviously, our hiding place has long been exposed. East Island wants to use Li Tianlan to lead us into the trap in advance. We can intervene in the battlefield, but I hope some people can calm down. Holy Light's eyes suddenly burst out a sharp light. Among the several dark forces present, only Knights Templars and the Jiang family of South America were most interested in Li Tianlan, especially Knights Templars. They received the order from the Vatican, or in other words, they followed the will of His Majesty the Pope, so they were determined to get Li Tianlan. Now Li Tianlan seemed to be far away from them, which made Holy Light a little excited. But Ben's words made him calm down quickly. Li Tianlan was one of the key figures in the final battle. Jianghu State wanted to protect him, East Island wanted to catch him, and the Jiang family of South America and Knights Templars also wanted to take him over. But now the final battle had just begun. If they caught Li Tianlan now, it would definitely lead to the joint attack of the two strongest forces, East Island and Jianghu State, and it would also destroy the tacit understanding between Knights Templars and the Jiang family of South America. Li Tianlan naturally had to be caught, but it also had to be at the right time. Now it seemed that it was still too early. I know what to do. Holy Light said blandly, I will put Li Tianlan's matter aside, but I also hope some people can restrain themselves. His eyes turned and fell on another person in the corner. That was a woman shrouded in darkness. In the absence of the third master of the Jiang family, the killer of the invincible realm in the dark world, evil, she was the representative of the Jiang family of South America. The woman in the dark chuckled and didn't say much. It's good that you can have a clear judgment. Ben turned around slowly and said softly, "Since the final battle has begun, of course, we have to join the battle. 10 minutes ago, I decided that all the elites of the Heroes Club will enter the battlefield together. The first target is the elites of East Island, and the second is the elites of Jianghu State. In the current situation, only by killing them can we qualify for the final battle. I hope that the final battle in Changdao will be between us. Before that, I hope that our alliance is unbreakable." Holy Light hesitated and nodded, saying, "I agree with this plan." "Agree." Crow's hoarse and unpleasant voice rang out. "I have no opinion." King Bear still looked at Holy Light with an unruly face. "What about the cooperation outside of Changdao?" In the dark, the voice of the woman who represented the Jiang family of South America rang out lightly and charmingly. No one spoke. Everyone's eyes were on Holy Light. The cooperation outside of Changdao was naturally to plot against Jianghu State. But Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Jianghu State was still in Jianghu State. If they wanted to keep the cooperation smooth, they must have the power to stop Wang Tianzong. The cooperation remains the same. Holy Light said slowly, "His Highness has set off from the headquarters of the Vatican. He will arrive at the border between Jianghu State and Annan State in 12 hours. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Ben smiled and said slowly, "Then, I wish us a happy cooperation." The woman who represented the Jiang family of South America chuckled and slowly disappeared. Without a sound, Crow also disappeared in the hall. The screen on the wall gradually dimmed. The whole hall returned to the most quiet and oppressive state again. The final battle of Changdao had begun. Similarly, a storm was about to rise at the border of Jianghu State. The general trend swept the dark world. After Changdao, Northern Europe, and North America, the fourth battlefield was about to appear. In the gradually darkening night, a black luxury car slowly drove into Changdao from Ninghu. The night was dark. Qin Weibai, who came to Changdao quietly and then went to Ninghu and finally returned to Changdao, sat quietly in the back of the car, looking at the dim light outside the window indifferently. The dim yellow light shone on a small corner in the back of the car. Qin Weibai sat in the corner shrouded by the light, looking more and more dreamy and ethereal. "Boss, Tianlan's whereabouts were exposed during the investigation, and he is now being encircled. Jianghu State has begun to send people to rescue him. Duke, Flaming Fire, and Horsewoman are also on the move, but they haven't found Tianlan yet." In the passenger seat, Saint answered a phone call and slowly reported. Qin Weibai's delicate body seemed to tighten for a moment, and then she slowly relaxed and said, "How long has it been?" "Nearly 20 hours. Saint's tone was still calm. Sunset Shadow tried to cover Tianlan's death. "The last news we got was that Tianlan and the others had been separated, and they were all on the run." Qin Weibai's delicate eyebrows slightly frowned. After a moment of silence, she slowly said, "Saint, you go to Tianlan yourself. Besides, have you locked on to her position?" After she separated from Tianlan, she seemed to want to run back, and she seemed to be hurt. Military counselor, who drove in person, took the initiative to say, "Let's go see her." Qin Weibai's eyes flashed with complexity, and she finally said softly. Military counselor responded, and then the car fell into silence again. "Aren't you going to ask me anything?" In the silence, Qin Weibai broke the silence and suddenly asked. "Boss, if you want to say something, you will tell us. If you don't want to say it, it doesn't matter." Saint seemed to know what Qin Weibai meant. He smiled and said, "I know there must be an earth-shattering big shot behind that child. Otherwise, no matter how talented he is, he won't be so horrible. But, it doesn't matter. Anyway, he is dead. We did this with the Wang family of Beihai. Even if someone comes for revenge in the future, so what?" Qin Weibai looked out of the window in silence. After a long time, she sighed and said, "His name is Cutting Huawu." Huawu. Huawu. Ha, he was a figure who could leave a glorious mark in the dark world, but now he is dead. What a pity. Her tone was cold, and she said it was a pity, but her eyes were clear without a trace of guilt. The most infatuated person was the most ruthless. In this world, in this era, she might feel sorry for many people, but as long as she was worthy of him, that was enough. What did the life and death of others have to do with her? If she owed someone, she owed someone. Moreover, in the grand scheme of things, could it really be so clear who owed who? A long time ago, she had made up her mind that in this life, even if she had to break her bones and give up everything. Chapter 220. The black limousine drove into downtown Chengdu without any disguise and passed through the battlefield. At the edge of the battlefield, a large number of East Island troops were gathering. Soldiers in all kinds of military uniforms were scattered at the edge of the battlefield, and all kinds of heavy weapons were placed in the most conspicuous places. Chengdu wasn't big, but it was still huge compared to an individual. In just a few days, East Island transferred troops from all over to Chengdu, and the number of troops around the edge of the battlefield was close to 100,000. With 100,000 people, it seemed unrealistic to surround a battlefield with a radius of 100 miles. But with all kinds of heavy firepower weapons and satellite monitoring, East Island was sure that they could hit any corner of the battlefield. The black limousine passed the checkpoint set by the East Island Army, but the guards here didn't even bother to look at it and let it go. Within 7 days, people were allowed to enter this place, but no one was allowed to leave. East Island wouldn't stop anyone who wanted to join this battlefield. The Dark World had its own rules. East Island also had its own rules. All the dark superpowers attacked East Island together, and East Island also drew a large enough battlefield, so they had to follow the rules in the place of the final battle. The 100,000 troops that East Island scattered at the edge of the battlefield could be said to be a deterrent, but more importantly, it was intercepting and protecting the outside of the battlefield from damage. The battlefield with a radius of 100 miles was big enough, and it wasn't a limit for all the superpowers. In this area, it didn't matter if they fought fiercely. No matter who won or lost in the end, the East Island Army wouldn't intervene, because this was a conflict within the scope of the Dark World. But in a big enough battlefield, if someone wanted to rush out and destroy East Island on purpose, he would be an invader, and East Island had every reason and ability to destroy any superpower. That was the rule. Today's final battle was like a vendetta in Jianghu. The authorities would pay attention to it, but they couldn't intervene. Even if East Island was wiped out in this final battle, they could only endure it. Once East Island dared to use the army to break the rule, what awaited East Island was a war. A real war. No one wanted to escalate the situation to such a serious extent. East Island didn't dare, Jianghu State didn't want to, and other superpowers didn't want to either. Keeping everything within the scope of the conflict in the Dark World, and winning or losing, they could still get the benefits they wanted, but it wouldn't cause catastrophic consequences. That was what everyone wanted to see. The black limousine rushed into the demolition area at the edge of the battlefield. On the passenger seat, Saint's figure slowly disappeared. Up to now, Jianghu State and Samsara had not found Li Tianlan, which could only mean that he was in the enemy-occupied area of the battlefield outside the radiation range of Jianghu State. If they searched from here, the probability of finding him was relatively higher. Military counselor continued to drive. In the back of the car, Qin Weibai remained calm and collected, but her pair of snow-white slender hands were tightly clenched into fists. "Where is she?" Qin Weibai asked softly. The military advisor who was driving took out a screen and looked at it before replying, "From here." Less than 20 kilometers away. Night has locked onto her position and is following her in secret. 20 kilometers, Qin Weibai's bright eyes flickered, and her whole person exuded a kind of enchanting and holy charm. The military counselor remained silent. This distance was indeed beyond his expectation. This place was close to the edge of the battlefield, completely outside the sphere of influence of Jianghu State. At first, according to Horsewoman, the other party should be fleeing back, but now it was 20 kilometers away from the edge of the battlefield. Obviously, after fleeing back for a distance, the other party turned back and went straight into the enemy-occupied area. She's looking for Tianlan. Qin Weibai suddenly sneered. She really doesn't give up. Hurry up, I want to see her right away. Military counselor answered and stepped on the accelerator. As the car accelerated, he hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask, do you really want to see her? Since killing Cutting Huawu, military counselor had felt that something was wrong. Although he didn't know what exactly was going on, he had some guesses from some clues. At this time, if the boss went to see her, there might be a risk of exposure. I have to go. Qin Weibai's voice was soft and firm. She's like a bomb around Tianlan. I must help him dismantle it. Kill her? Military counselor's eyes suddenly turned cold. You can't kill her. Qin Weibai shook her head and said no more. Military counselor didn't ask anymore, but he drove faster and faster. The car rushed out of the demolition area, and the trees on the road were moving backward quickly. The night outside the window was quiet. Qin Weibai looked at the night sky through the window and said to herself coldly, years of hard work, just to make a wedding dress. Even if I give you a good death, so what? Sneaking, searching, observing. The quiet night shrouded the whole dense forest. Dongxing Rushi looked calm and cautious, walking carefully in the forest. The final battle had broken out. But this place was behind the enemy, and it hadn't been covered by the fire of war yet. But the density of patrols in the whole area gradually increased. Dongxing Rushi's face was pale. She avoided the patrols of East Island and searched carefully. She never thought about going back. That night, as Sunset Shadow and the Big Dipper died together, and as Wind Ghost died, only 2 of the 7 Thunder-Shocking Realm experts who chased them survived. They desperately rushed out of the encirclement, but in the chaos, they were completely scattered by the furious elites of East Island. Dongxing Rushi fled alone in the battlefield, trying her best to get rid of the East Island experts who were chasing her, and then began to return without hesitation. Along the way, he had been hiding, not only from the elites of East Island, but also from the elites of Zhongzhou State. They were all in his hiding range. She went deep into the enemy's rear alone. Dongxing Rushi's clear eyes became more and more alert. Her whole body was tense, and she was ready to attack and escape with all her strength. It was stuffy in the quiet forest. Dongxing Rushi, who was almost soaked in sweat, sat behind a big tree, exhausted. She silently ate the compressed biscuit in her hand, looking calm. In the quiet forest, there was a slight sound of wind. The soft footsteps passed into Dongxing Rushi's ears with the dull wind. In an instant, Dongxing Rushi, who was tense all over, directly bounced up from the ground, turned around, and stared in the direction of the footsteps. There were no stars and no moon in the sky tonight. In the dim light, a tall and slender figure walked toward her alone, casually. She was wearing white clothes and a white skirt, and she was peerless. That was a kind of unparalleled charm that could almost make all women feel ashamed of themselves. It was illusory, as if she didn't belong to the mortal world, so perfect that it was like a dream. Dongxing Rushi didn't feel the danger, but out of instinct, she suddenly took a few steps back. The white figure approached her unhurriedly. In the extremely low visibility, Dongxing Rushi finally saw the other's face. Her face was perfect, delicate, and sharp, like that of a fairy. I'm Qin Weibai. The white figure looked at Dongxing Rushi and said in a calm tone, sit. Dongxing Rushi didn't speak, nor did she sit down. The silent sword was behind her, but she held a red dagger tightly in her hand, and the faint killing intent surged in her body. At this moment, Dongxing Rushi was sure that there were only 2 people near this forest. One was herself. The other was this extraordinary woman in the dark world who didn't know martial arts. Facing the faint fluctuating killing intent, Qin Weibai didn't seem nervous at all. Her bright eyes quietly glanced at the dagger in Dongxing Rushi's hand. She chuckled, but her tone was a little complicated. Missing and forgetting each other. It's really a story of entanglement. Dongxing Rushi's pupils suddenly contracted, and the light in her eyes changed. The pure color flickered, and it seemed to fade away. Stop pretending. Qin Weibai said indifferently, you're not Dongqing Rushi. If you were her, you wouldn't be nervous facing me. Even if you were nervous, you wouldn't hold this acacia. Silence is her weapon, and you are her second personality? You know me well? Dongqing Rushi's eyes suddenly changed. The purity faded away, and it became melancholy, indifference, and coldness. What do you want? Dongqing Yueshan asked. For nearly 100 years in Zhongzhou State. Do you know which family is the most pitiful and pathetic? Qin Weibai didn't answer Dongqing Yueshan, but asked in a very soft tone. The soft tone seemed to come from the sky, and it lingered, with a dreamy feeling like the sounds of nature. Dongqing Yueshan's eyes were in a trance, and then they became cold again. It's not the Li family. Qin Weibai answered her own question, it's the Dongqing clan. Dongqing Yueshan still didn't say a word. Do you know Dongqing Huangtu? Qin Weibai asked indifferently. Dongqing Yueshan's eyes suddenly became colder. You know a lot. In the silence, Dongqing Yueshan finally opened her mouth and sneered slightly. But you shouldn't have appeared in front of me alone. I'm not Rushi, I'm Dongqing Yueshan. Boss Qin, are you warning me about something by appearing in front of me? Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? Kill me? Qin Weibai laughed. Her laughter was cold and sweet, echoing in the forest like a fairy. What a coincidence. There was once someone who wanted to kill me. Her name was Li Yueshan. Crack, Dongqing Yueshan suddenly took a step forward, and lovesickness was unsheathed. She looked at Qin Weibai coldly, and her eyes were hesitant. I know what you want to do. In other words, I know you better than you know yourself. Since you said it's a warning, then it's a warning. Qin Weibai's voice gradually became cold. I really hate you like this. But I like Rushi very much. So, from now on, I don't want to see you again. Do you understand? How can you do that? Dongqing Yueshan was furious. Because I'm Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai slowly turned around and left the forest. If you dare to disobey me, you might as well continue your plan. If you really drive me crazy, you will bear the consequences. I promise you will regret it. She stepped forward. At that moment, Dongqing Yueshan was about to make a move. Clatter, a dull sound suddenly rang out, but it sounded like thunder in Dongqing Yueshan's ears. In her sight, Qin Weibai's footsteps had landed. But another footstep sounded in the void after her footsteps landed, and it coincided with her footsteps. Dongqing Yueshan's face changed dramatically, and she stared at the surroundings of Qin Weibai. At this moment, she realized that the reason why Qin Weibai dared to come over was that she was not alone at all. There was another superior hiding in the void, following her all the time. A superior that she didn't even notice. Saint couldn't do that, and neither could military counselor. The master of Samsara Palace. It could only be the master of Samsara Palace. Dongqing Yueshan suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. Qin Weibai's figure slowly disappeared in the night. Dongqing Yueshan stood where she was quietly. In front of her, the void suddenly began to twist. In her sight, the space in front of her was twisting and shaking. Two beautiful words gradually formed in the void, and then became stable. Words were carved in the void. This was the real means of the invincible realm. Dongqing Yueshan stared at the two words, and the expression on her beautiful face kept changing, uncertain. That was the two words that everyone could recognize. But maybe only she understood what it meant. Chapter 221. In the hot and depressing night, Dongqing Rushi began to return, but Li Tianlan was moving forward. He had no choice but to move forward. The fierce fighting had lasted for a day and a night. Li Tianlan himself couldn't tell when he was separated from the others. The village in the number 3 defensive zone was like a hornet's nest. It was not until the real encirclement began that Li Tianlan realized that Jifeng Sword Raining School was not the only force stationed there. After the death of the Big Dipper and Wind Ghost, they broke out of the encirclement almost immediately. But before they rushed out of the forest, the elites of East Island from all directions had already surrounded them. The elites of the village behind the forest also moved out in large numbers. At least 1,000 people were like a torrent, instantly drowning them. There was only killing left. There was only fighting left. There were enemies in all directions, and all of them were full of killing intent. Ice and fire roared, thunder flashed, airflow surged, and gunshots roared. Li Tianlan could only rush in the predetermined direction with all his strength. From night to day, until the moonlight faded and the sun rose, Li Tianlan found that he had lost contact with the people around him. Sunset shadow died. Deep Dream disappeared. Dongqing Rushi disappeared. Du Hanin also disappeared. After he rushed out of one encirclement, he seemed to step into another one. The way back had been completely blocked. Under the almost carpet search of East Island elites, Li Tianlan could only flee in the opposite direction. One day and one night. In the quiet time near the end of the fourth day, Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, was silently treating his wounds. A lot of blood had dried up on him, and some of it was still flowing. Some of the blood belonged to him, but most of it belonged to others. Looking from a distance, Li Tianlan was completely covered in blood now. He threw his torn shirt aside. On his back, there was a knife wound so deep that the bone could be seen, as if it was directly carved there, and blood was flowing. The sword wound was nearly 30 centimeters long, and a lot of blood gushed out of the wound. Li Tianlan tore off a piece of bark and bit it in his mouth. His whole body shook. A layer of fire burned directly on his back. The condensed fire spread along his back and quickly covered the whole wound. Humph! Li Tianlan bit the bark hard. Under the sharp pain, his face suddenly became distorted and pale, but his eyes were full of indifference and chilling tranquility. The wounds and large pieces of flesh were burnt by the fire and barely healed together. Li Tianlan's expression was cold, and the flames on his fingertips rose again. His chest, abdomen, arms, thighs, and some relatively shallow wounds were all burnt little by himself. Cold sweat kept flowing down his forehead. Li Tianlan, whose whole body seemed to emit a burnt smell, had a twisted face, but his calm eyes gradually revealed a kind of crazy chill. The flame wiped the last wound on his body. Li Tianlan, who was on the verge of collapse, moved his body and leaned against the tree behind him. He took out the almost bitten-through piece of bark from his mouth and ate it without looking at it. Only one day had passed. But Li Tianlan was completely different. For nearly a day and a night, East Island obviously regarded him as the main target of encirclement and suppression. After they blocked his retreat route intentionally or unintentionally, the lineup they sent after him was also suffocatingly luxurious. At first, hundreds of people chased after him non-stop, and then 2 Thundershocking Realm experts joined the team. In less than 6 hours, the Thundershocking Realm experts increased from 2 to 4. Then the half-step Invincible Realm experts showed up in person. The mighty chase of hundreds of people finally dispersed. In the end, it turned into a hunting team led by 2 half-step Invincible Realm experts, 5 Thundershocking Realm experts, and almost 20 Fire-Flaming Realm experts. Such a lineup was just to chase after a young man. East Island had paid great attention to him. Li Tianlan himself didn't know how many people he had killed. Elites of the Qi-controlling realm and the ice-condensing realm died under the human emperor's hands one after another. He rushed from the forest to the highway, then into the mountains, and finally into the forest. He fled all the way to the edge of the battlefield. And the strength of the people chasing him was getting stronger and stronger. This was totally the cruelest battle he had encountered since he came to East Island. He only remembered that he killed a Thundershocking Realm expert on the other side in the process of fleeing, and the horrible wound on his back was left at that time. The expert of the half-step Invincible Realm attacked in person. That saber and the sword light crisscrossed the forest, almost splitting his body in half. The crazy killing and fighting made him release his deliberately suppressed killing intent and fighting intent uncontrollably. In this state, Li Tianlan's every move carried a kind of sharpness and danger that couldn't be concealed. The high concentration of his willpower made his vigilance and fighting instinct rise to the limit. In the escape and fighting, his speed was getting faster and faster, and his attacks were getting fiercer and fiercer. The flying blood splashed in the screams. He seemed to gradually erase all the emotions except killing. It was like he was awakening or transforming. His willpower kept breaking the limit, and the imperfect heavenly king heart became more and more perfect. The unique technique of Zhuanyuantai focused on the state of mind. The 24 moves of sword, especially the most powerful moves of the absolute sword, demanded more willpower than anything else. In an almost hopeless environment, Li Tianlan saw an opportunity for himself to become stronger. Therefore, although he was fleeing, he did not retreat. Otherwise, in the process of this chase, Li Tianlan saw at least 2 opportunities for him to rush out. Although he wasn't absolutely sure, at least he could get closer to the elites of Zhongzhou state. But he kept going deep into the enemy's rear and quietly made an arc near the edge of the battlefield. He put himself at death's door. As for whether there would be a light at the end of the tunnel, he didn't even think about it. In the constant chasing and fighting, the desire for powerful strength became a little stronger and became an obsession. He almost instinctively pursued more powerful strength and a more perfect state of mind. This kind of obsession even went beyond life and death. Vaguely, he felt oppressed, or suppressed. It was as if there was an unknown power, or rather, a power that he had forgotten, that kept on suppressing his increasingly perfect martial will. It was like a shackle, like a shackle. Li Tianlan didn't know what it was. But as his willpower and concentration kept surpassing the peak, in the battle of life and death, the shackles that he ignored and forgot also began to disappear little by little and completely collapsed. It seemed to be right in front of him. Li Tianlan silently gnawed the bark in his hand. Without any replenishment, he sucked the bitter juice of the bark and swallowed the chewed wood. In a trance. He seemed to have returned to many years ago, to the era when he would rather gnaw the bark than drink the smelly porridge. The hard and resilient bark pierced the corner of his mouth. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm, but the corners of his mouth were bleeding, and he was grinning hideously. His aura, which was originally weak, continued to rise. Silent but hysterical madness with a sharp edge brewed and whistled from him, and finally became violent. At this moment, Li Tianlan was like a blazing sun. But it emitted a dark light. This bastard's speed is too fast. In the forest 1 kilometer away from Li Tianlan, a thunder-shocking realm expert in charge of chasing Li Tianlan was gnashing his teeth and cursing, but his footsteps did not stop at all. After nearly a day and a night of pursuit, it was not easy for the escapees, but it was also a kind of torture for the pursuers. In the hunting team, except for the 2 half-step invincible realm experts who looked normal, even several thunder-shocking realm experts, including the 2 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, were tired and pale, not to mention others. They poured sugary liquids into their mouths as they walked. 6 hours ago, the hunting squad had become scattered and disorganized. In the beginning, 2 half-step invincible realm experts led the team, 5 thunder-shocking realm experts were in the middle, and 18 fire-flaming realm experts were in the rear. But now, only 4 or 5 of the 18 fire-flaming realm experts could barely keep up, and the others had fallen far behind. The formation had been scattered, and the hunting team had become a real team. If it weren't for the saber strike that directly injured Li Tianlan not long ago, perhaps most of the members of the hunting team would have lost their confidence. There are 2 idioms in Zhongzhou state, an arrow at the end of its flight, or the last radiance of the setting sun. He can't hold on for long. Inform the nearby elites to outflank him from 4 directions. Let's take our time. Don't push him too hard, and try to capture him alive. A man walking in the front spoke slowly. He was extremely short and had a baby face. At first glance, he looked like a child of 14 or 15 years old. But the so-called child had an extremely fierce aura at this time, and the fierce aura made everyone subconsciously keep a distance from him. He walked alone in the front, like a flash of saber light in the dark. Fierce and dazzling. His code name was Dal. He was one of the deputy commanders of the Divine Wind Force. He was a veteran expert who had been famous for nearly 20 years, and also one of Shinichi Miyamoto's most trusted confidants. With his strength, he was naturally qualified to stay in the temporary headquarters in the mountain, but Shinichi Miyamoto put him outside. Obviously, he wanted him to be the most powerful executor. That little bastard, don't fall into my hands. A thunder-shocking realm expert muttered to himself, with resentment and anger in his eyes. What can I do if I fall into your hands? The baby smiled. There were even 2 deep dimples on his baby face, which could hide his real age very well, and he looked a little cute. The thunder-shocking realm expert who spoke first paused and kept silent. He was also from the Divine Wind Force, and he had a high status in the Divine Wind Force. In his position, he naturally knew some secrets, and he also knew the importance of Li Tianlan to East Island. This man, if they could capture him alive, they could never kill him. The best way to deal with him was to rope him in and ask him to surrender. It's said that His Majesty has said that if he catches Li Tianlan, as long as he is willing to surrender, he can choose any of the 2 unmarried royal princes, and they can even follow him. This is really, another superior of the half-step invincible realm said thoughtfully, and then shook his head. Everyone else was shocked at the same time. The Mikado had 3 daughters now. The eldest daughter, Princess Yukiko, was married, and the other 2 royal princes were still unmarried. They were a pair of world-famous beauties, and many people were coveting them. In order to rope Li Tianlan in, the Mikado was willing to let the 2 royal princes follow him, which showed how important Li Tianlan was, but it also showed how embarrassed East Island was now. It's really funny. Baby Doll shook his head and gave his evaluation in a knowing manner. The other superior of the half-step invincible realm with the code name Thousand Face smiled and didn't say anything. He was a burly man who looked very handsome and majestic, but now he was willing to stand behind the baby. The difference in their strength was obvious. When the baby was about to continue talking, the phone suddenly rang. He frowned and picked up the phone. After listening to a few words, his face changed dramatically. The phone was hung up in a hurry. His baby face quickly became gloomy, and he was silent. What's wrong? Thousand Face frowned and asked. Half an hour ago, Azure Dragon Gong Sun Chi raided our number 6 stronghold, and 80 elites were all killed. Besides, the Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club joined the battle. The baby's tone was cold. Gong Sun Chi? Thousand Face was shocked. In the whole dark world, Azure Dragon Gong Sun Chi of Jianghu State seemed to be the first person under the invincible realm. Such a figure should have been the key force to change the situation in the final battle, but now he couldn't wait to take action when the final battle just broke out. Obviously, they were equally determined to rescue Li Tianlan. Half an hour ago, it was Gong Sun Chi. Now maybe Tribulation, Firmament, and others had started to take action. The number 6 stronghold was not far from the village where Li Tianlan was ambushed at first. It wasn't a stronghold. Near the village, there were thousands of special warfare elites of East Island stationed. Thousand Faces' face changed in an instant. In order to rescue Li Tianlan, Jianghu State was going to rush directly through the area where they were stationed? Did they think it was the time of the final battle? This was definitely an accident. But there were more than one accident. The participation of the Polar Ground Alliance and the Heroes Club was also a huge variable. Thousand Faces' face was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said, "What should we do? Let's go back and support them." They came to catch Li Tianlan for the victory of the final battle of Changdao. Now Jianghu State was attacking where they were, and even figures like Gong Sun Chi took action in person. If they didn't go back to support them, the consequences would be unpredictable. Besides, the Heroes Club and the Polar Ground Alliance were eyeing them covetously. It was impossible for them to help East Island at all. Instead, they would hit them when they were down. He and the thousand-faced assassin were both half-step invincible realm experts. This was the power that was enough to change the situation of the battle. At this time, it was not worth it to be dragged here by Li Tianlan. Moreover, the current Li Tianlan was not worthy of their efforts. Ice Bird, Black Shield, continue to chase after Li Tianlan. Ice Bird will take over the command of the nearby area and order the nearby elites to surround him. The rest of you, follow me. Baby Doll said straightforwardly. He glanced at the depths of the forest with a hint of unwillingness in his eyes. He sneered regretfully and said, "Don't worry, he has been hit by my saber. He won't be able to hold on for long. Right now, he's definitely not a match for any of you. After capturing him, immediately bring him back to the command center." Ice Bird understands. Among the 5 thunder-shocking realm experts, a beautiful and cold woman took a step forward and said in a deep voice. She and Black Shield were both experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Any one of them was enough to make Li Tianlan go all out in his heyday. Now that Li Tianlan was seriously injured and they had the cooperation of many nearby elites, catching Li Tianlan was a piece of cake. A hint of unwillingness flashed in Baby Doll's eyes again, but he did not dare to continue to delay. He and thousand-faced assassin took the other 3 thunder-shocking realm experts and directly rushed back. Because she was too excited, Ice Bird's cold and beautiful face directly flushed, which was as delicate and beautiful as a flower. She naturally knew what Baby Doll was unwilling to accept. They had been chasing Li Tianlan for a day and a night, and none of them had given up. It was not because Li Tianlan was worthy of so many forces chasing after him, but because the credit for catching Li Tianlan was too great. Now, with the departure of Baby Doll and thousand-faced assassin, the credit would fall on her. The figures of Baby Doll and thousand-faced assassin disappeared at the end of her sight. Ice Bird took a deep breath and suddenly turned around. She glanced at Black Shield, who was silent, and said without hesitation, "Go." Less than a dozen meters behind Ice Bird and Black Shield, the void fluctuated imperceptibly. What an idiot. Evil, the only invincible realm killer in the dark world, sneered. Then he restrained all his aura and followed behind the 2 quietly. As an invincible realm expert, he could be said to be one of the first people to find Li Tianlan's traces. The 2 were even 20 meters away from each other when they were closest to each other. But Evil never made a move. He really did not lie to Shinichi Miyamoto. He did feel a kind of vague danger from Li Tianlan, the weak young heavenly son. This feeling was very strange, but it made him not dare to act rashly. Now Li Tianlan was seriously injured. It was good to let the 2 idiots in front of him test the water first. Evil's figure completely merged into the void. He held a ring-like emerald disc in his hand and was getting closer and closer to Li Tianlan. Under the tree hundreds of meters ahead. Li Tianlan swallowed the last piece of bark, and his calm eyes suddenly lit up. 2 footsteps were getting closer and closer to him. There were only 2 people. In the darkness, he held the human emperor and stood up calmly. The crazy killing intent instantly surged around him. When his willpower was absolutely concentrated, he once again felt the unknown shackles, and he also saw an opportunity. He raised his arm and the gun. Li Tianlan took a step forward in the direction where the pursuers were rushing from. It was a small step, but it was also a big step. With this step, Li Tianlan's aura suddenly soared, from the stabilization phase of the ice-condensing realm to the peak. The 4th day was coming to an end. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.